How you all doing?
Doing good.
How are we doing? You ready for a big night? Get yourselves caffeinated. I'm telling you, we've got big stuff coming up. Well, let's see how heated it gets. Let's see how heated it gets, because it's very big tonight. It is very, very big, and let's make it happen. All right. So let's begin by dedicating tonight's class in loving memory of Daniel Mayer Newman. Thank you, Amy and Max, for sponsoring. Lesson 4. We've made it through the halfway point, the midway point for our course, huh? And we're up to the genre of Torah called Halachah, which is probably the most misunderstood part of Torah. On the one hand, it seems the most simplistic, right? Jewish law is Jewish law. Well, law is law. Yeah, somebody can know more law or less law, but ultimately law is law. It shouldn't be that sophisticated. And some would even say it's not even that interesting. It's I don't know how scientific it is, but for sure it is anecdotal evidence. Whenever I've done a Jewish law course, it was always our smallest numbers, and I kind of get it. It doesn't have the emotional appeal. It doesn't have, I don't know, but it's really Jewish law is really beautiful, and as we'll see tonight, it's misunderstood, and it's really underappreciated. So here's a story. A rabbi and a priest walk into a bar. And the bartender looks up and says, "What is this, some type of joke?" That's the joke. All right. I didn't have anything too much better for tonight. I didn't want to use a whole joke. Not good? Not good? All right, I'll give you another one. You ready for another one? A guy walks into a bar. It's in Manhattan, the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Walks into a bar. The bar is very, very busy. He's waiting online. And as he's waiting online, the table, right off to the side, he sees two men. They're sitting, they're drinking, they're talking. And one says, "Tell me, where did you grow up?" He says, "I grew up right over here, Lower East Side." "Really? You grew up here, Lower East Side?" "Like, I also grew up Lower East Side. It's amazing. I don't know why I never met you. We're similar age. What school did you go to here?" Tells him the school. "You went to that school? I was in that very same school. How did we never meet each other before?" "Which college you go to?" Told him the college. "I was in that college too. What year did you graduate?" 87? I graduated 87. And this man is waiting online. He looks at it, he says, "This is unbelievable. This is not in the middle of in the middle of Iowa. This is New York. Millions of people. Two strangers. What a coincidence." He's really amazed by what he's seeing. So he goes up to the bartender. It's his turn to go up. He says, "Bartender, did you see that? That's quite amazing. Two strangers grew up together, went everywhere, and they're meeting after the first time." So the bartender says, "Don't mind them. The Goldberg twins are drunk again." Okay. What's the connection to tonight's class? I don't know. Maybe there's a connection. You'll have to find out. Okay. Lesson 4, Halachah, Jewish law. Jewish law is a very, very important part of the Torah. And there's so much happening in the Torah. You look at your maps. There's so many different genres. The Torah is so vast. What type of flavor and genre does the Torah not touch upon? But at the end of the day, Halachah, Jewish law, is at the center of the Torah, is at the center of Judaism. Let's start with our first text. All right? Let's do our first text. Mary, you want to take us off? Text 2 on page 149. Let's read this over here.
The word Torah means instruction. So the function of Torah is to instruct us in the actions that we should do. That is why it is specifically the 5 books of Moses that are called Torah, as they contain the mitzvot.
At the end of the day, what does Torah mean? Torah doesn't mean inspiration. Torah doesn't mean philosophy or theology or ideas. Torah, at the end of the day, is a user's manual for life. So yes, Torah has so much stories and narratives and history and theology and philosophy and ethics and mysticism, what have you. But if you want to really get to the core of Judaism, where does the rubber hit the road? It's in Jewish law. It's in Halachah. That is where the theory of Judaism comes alive. And in that sense, some people look at Judaism and they see a split. There's the Jewish way of life, and then there's the Jewish way of learning, Jewish thought. And the real truth is, you can't make that divide. Or some people say there's Jewish law and there's Jewish ethics. Oh, I like Jewish ethics. Can't really make that divide. It's one and the same. You know what Jewish law is? Jewish law is everything Jewish coming to life. Or in other words, what do these ideas look like in actuality? I told you the story before. Here's a story. You ready? There was a rabbi of a congregation, of a community, and they had a little shul, and they did a massive construction project, expanding the synagogue. And this rabbi took it upon himself. He's going to fundraise the money. He's going to deal with the builders and the architects and the contractors and the permits. And he does that. Years and years, headaches, schwitz, stress. And finally, the building is ready. But this rabbi it's been years and years where he's on edge. It's just such a stressful thing. I know, I watched my father put up the building of Chabad of Princeton, from buying the property to raising the funds to everything. My father went white over it. That's what made him into an old man. Just the problems with the townships and the permits and the construction. It was horrible. A lot of stress involved. Okay. They planned Sunday, finally. Fine, let me just do this over here. Give me a second, guys. All right. Finally, one Sunday afternoon, they planned to have the grand opening, the inauguration. The community is going to come out. They're going to do a ribbon cutting. They're going to welcome them to the new building. And it's all the last minute. That Sunday morning was when they were finally ready to lay down the concrete in the parking lot of the new section of the building. In another 2 hours, the event's about to start. The rabbi is outside. He's stressed. He didn't sleep for days, for nights. And right then is dismissal from the Hebrew school, from Sunday Hebrew school. And 2 kids are waiting for their parents to come, and they chase each other, and they run right through the wet concrete. And the rabbi sees this and loses it. He just loses it. He's done. He starts screaming at the kids. Can't you look where you're running? What are you doing? Now I have to redo the whole thing. And right then one of the parents pull up, sees the rabbi livid, screaming at the kids. So he rolls down the window and screams, Rabbi, didn't you teach us that we're never allowed to scream at our children? You're screaming at the children. So the rabbi turns around. He's still mad. He's on fire. He says, yes, I did tell you that. But that was in the abstract. Now it's in the concrete. So ideas are wonderful in the abstract. But if you want to see where Judaism pounds the pavement, hits the pavement, in the concrete, that's halachah. Halachah is where we see how does God want us to live life. When we have decisions to make, practical decisions to make every single day, the small issues, the big issues, everything. There's a divine way to approach it. What does God want of me in this moment? And that's halachah. That is the definition of halachah. There's no question too big. There's no question too small, no part of life which is too small that halachah doesn't touch upon. So, dear friends, today I want to do 2 things with you. I want to give you a grand tour through the evolution, through the development, and through the history of halachah. And then once we understand how halachah works and how halachah has evolved and continues to evolve today, then we're gonna do a real case study. We're actually gonna go through and see, just like we did last week in the extra half hour for those of you who stayed, a real taste of Talmud. We're gonna do a real taste of halachah. And we're gonna see how halachah is not some archaic code of law. It's a living, breathing law that we still live with today answer new questions, apply it to new questions. I was recently speaking with somebody, and we got into the conversation of the laws of Shabbos. And somehow we were talking about the concept of, would it be permissible, according to Jewish law, to get into one of Elon Musk's self-driving cars on Shabbos? Imagine if you could program a car that the door opens by itself at 10:30. 10:35, the door shuts by itself and starts driving. You don't even have to do anything. All you do is slide into your seat. Don't touch a button. Don't give any commands. Self-driving vehicle. Well, Jewish law lets you drive with that on Shabbos. It's an interesting thought. Maybe people who keep the laws of Shabbos can start getting into a self-driving car. It's an interesting thought. Self-driving taxis is going to be a new thing soon. All right, all these interesting things. Oh, so that's the thing. There's something called the Shabbos elevator, which is very well accepted today, halachically. Shabbos elevator there's no controls. It automatically stops by every single floor for 30 seconds, and you could use it. And in many apartment buildings around the world, in Jewish communities, there's no problem to use a Shabbos elevator. Okay, so we're talking, and he tells me, listen, I know you're a rabbi, but between me and you, this whole thing is made up. The Talmud couldn't have spoken about Shabbos elevators. The Talmud couldn't have spoken about self-driving cars. So just rabbis are making up new laws about Shabbos. He's like, okay, but let's just be honest about it. It's just one big made-up thing. Who agrees with that statement? Do you agree with that? And it is interesting. What does that mean that today there are brand new developments in medicine? I'm talking about barely 5-year-old developments, 10-year-olds. And all of a sudden we're going to say, Jewish law has something to say about it. Jewish law has something to say about IVF. Really? Something that was inconceivable. You couldn't even imagine it. It wasn't even science fiction in biblical times. Jewish law has an opinion on this? Really? How so? So there's a certain misconception. What does halachah mean? What does that mean that a Jew today in 2023 is living with Judaism and Jewish law? So we're going to go through the history, through the development. Let's try to understand how it works. And we'll actually try to bring it alive. You ready? It's a little bit of history and a little bit of the mechanics of it as well. So here we go. Take a look, dear friends, in your books on page 158, and be ready to be overwhelmed. Page 158. And turn your books vertically. This is a map of the story of Halachah. Now it all makes sense, no? Okay, so I also want you to take out your big maps, all right? So you have your big timeline maps, and you have your maps in your book. So you have big map and small map. The big map shows you the big picture, all the genres of Judaism, and then we have this specific map, the more zoomed in map, specifically about Halachah. There's a few things that I want to show you over here. Let's start with your big map, timeline map, right? We'll get to that in a second. Timeline map. We are right now by the third orange bar. You see that the third bar, which is orange, which takes us through the world of Halachah. You will notice, let me just point out to you, that the halachic field is more populated than the other genres. And that again, if you compare halacha to the next category, Musar, there's more than double the amount of names and books in halacha than Musar and philosophy, et cetera, because halacha is so important. Halacha is critical. Halacha is basic to life. So this map in your book is a zoomed in and more detailed version of the map in your timeline. But I want to point out to you something very interesting. Because one of the things that we're going to be doing today, in today's class, is going to be transitioning from pre-Talmudic time to post-Talmudic time. And that's a very big shift in the world of Jewish teachings. before the Talmud, you don't have specialized books. So until the end of the Talmudic era, which if you look at your map, you'll see on the bottom where there are the milestones. So on your map, you'll see where there's a redaction of the Talmud in the year 505. 505 marks a key moment in Jewish history. Until the year 505, there's no specialized books. So if you walk into a bookstore in the year 300 and say, I want to buy a book of Jewish law, or you're going to walk in and say, I want to buy a book of Jewish inspiration, I want to buy a book of Jewish mysticism, you know what they would tell you? What are you talking about? There's only one Judaism. There's the Bible and there's the Talmud. Or in other words, Judaism, when all of its specific flavors and colors and variations, was all one big mush. It was all collected in the Talmud, pretty eclectically. It wasn't organized. Everything is everywhere. Any given tractate of the Talmud. You'll have law, you'll have history, you'll have mysticism, you'll have Agadah, you'll have everything. What not? You'll have ethical teachings, moral teachings. It was only after what we call the sealing of the Talmud, the redaction of the Talmud in the year 500, which there was a change of an era, which is the sages after the Talmud understood that the era of the sages is over, and we cannot argue with the Talmud. So a lot of what happens post-Talmud are works that bring to life, organize, clarify, keep on unpacking and developing specific genres, but all based on the Talmud. So in a certain way, if you want to think of it as a stream of water, the Bible is very narrow because everything is so compacted in the Bible. The Mishnah expands the river a little bit more. Now it's a little bit broader. The Talmud expands this river. Now it's very wide. Post-Talmud, the river starts breaking up into different streams. That's the way you have to think about it. So the whole idea that you could go to a bookstore and buy a specific book on a specific area of Torah, that is a specific development from here and onward, which is exactly what you see. There are very few books that are over here that are really not part of Talmudic or Midrashic teachings. The only real exception is Kabbalah. Kabbalah did have a few, like the Zohar, that at the same time of the Talmud, Kabbalistic teachings were being recorded in separate books, in separate works. But really, all of Judaism is one thing. So in a certain way, lesson 4 is a midpoint and a shift as we transition to more modern Jewish history, which really changes the way Jewish learning happens, the way the Jewish books happen in the modern age, going basically from the year 500 and onward. Okay, let us now go to the world of Halachah. I want to take you on a tour through this tree called the Halachic tree. It's very overwhelming, and there's a lot of names over here. And if you don't understand the names and if you don't know the books, then all these names don't mean much, right? But I want to point out to you that basically the tree of Halachah happens in 3 or maybe 4 phases. And when you understand what's happening, there's a beautiful development going on over here. Let us begin at the very top. What is Halachah? What is Jewish law at the beginning of time? The first phase of Halachah, which is the very beginning of your map, is what we will call the original version of Jewish law. Where is Jewish law? Where does it come from? Well, all Jewish law stems from the Torah. Every single law that we have is based on a verse and a teaching in the Torah. There was an oral tradition, as we've learned earlier. Moses taught us the laws. We've extracted more laws from the text. And eventually they were written down in the Mishnah. And then the Talmud really expounded and brought to life Jewish law. This is the first phase of Jewish law. At this point of Jewish law, I want to reiterate this. There was no code. So if you would say, where's the book? Where's the book that just tells you all the laws? There's no such book. Where is it? It's scattered throughout the Mishnah and Gemara. And good luck finding it. The Gemara is not organized. The Gemara is like getting lost in a forest in the middle of the night. You don't know if you're walking in circles. You have no clue what you're going to bump into. You can't make heads or tails of anything. So most of Jewish law, how did people know Jewish law? You knew it by osmosis. You grew up with it. How did the Jewish mother know the laws of kosher? Because she grew up in her mother's home and she knows it from her mother. Even the most complex laws, for example, had a kosher meat. If you slaughter a cow, there's an idea of koshering the meat to extract all the blood. Now that's an art. You have to know how to do it. It's like a science. Jewish law says that a Jewish woman who does it, you automatically trust that she did a good job. If a man does it, you got to check out his credentials. Does he know what he's doing? Does he know how to cook? Jewish law says that. And the Rebbe once spoke about it. The Rebbe said it's a tragedy that today the lost art that women always possessed of how to kosher a piece of meat. It's an area of Judaism that was given over to the Jewish woman specifically. And now Jewish women don't know how to do it anymore. The Rebbe was upset about it. That a piece of our tradition is fading away. That tradition was alive by the Jewish woman. Who held on to that tradition? It was always known. Who do you trust more with kosher? The man in the house or the woman in the house? The woman, of course. That was her domain. So Jewish law, basic daily Jewish law, was something that you knew. It wasn't in a book. It lived in people. So yes, there was a Mishnah. Yes, there was a Talmud. But that wasn't where you knew the laws from. You knew the laws by knowing it. And you'd go every single day to synagogue and the rabbi would teach you the laws you need to know. Part of Jewish law is that 30 days before every single holiday, the rabbi had to start lecturing to his community about all the laws. So how did you know how to keep Passover? How did you know what to do in the Seder? It's been a year since you did it. Part of Jewish life, oral tradition. You go to your synagogue, you go to your rabbi, every single day there's a half-hour lecture. By the time Pesach comes, you know what you're doing. But there was no books. Now, if you had a very complex case, the greatest scholars knew where to look in the Talmud for the specific discussions about any given issue, and they knew how to find the law. But till today, if you will try to find the final ruling, what should you do in this case? In the area of Jewish law, if you would try just getting that from the Talmud, it's impossible. You'll probably get it wrong. Because the Talmud is so dense, and you don't know what you're looking for. And any given case, it could be pages and pages of deliberations and arguments that you don't even. But what do we do? What do we do? So really, the Talmud is not a book that, unless you're an absolute genius and a scholar, you cannot find Jewish law from the Talmud. But this is how Jewish law lives for the first 1,500 years of Judaism. There's no book of Jewish law. And even when stuff gets written down in the Mishnah and the Gemara, which is the Talmud, it's still not a code. That is the first phase of the history of Halachah. What then happens? What then happens moving along is Talmud is published. Okay, we have a few characters over here who are writing commentaries on the Talmud. And every single commentary in the Talmud is also developing. It's a commentary as well on the Jewish law in the Talmud. So you have Rashi, you have Rabbeinu Hananel, you have the Tosafos, you have Nachmanides. All right, all these people are contributing to our understanding of halacha. But then comes one man and does the most radical move in Judaism since the writing of the Mishnah, which is our very own, very beloved Maimonides, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, the Rambam. Now, everybody knows that Maimonides was a very big deal. But why? What actually did Maimonides do that made him, right, the GOAT? You know what the GOAT is? That's a new age term, right? The GOAT means the greatest of all times. We all know Maimonides was great, but why? He was a great philosopher. He was a doctor. Let me tell you what makes Maimonides great. This is what makes him great. He saw a need. He saw the times are changing. How are the times changing? Jewish communities are becoming very isolated. very decentralized. It used to be that there was a center of Judaism in Babylonia, up until right before Maimonides' days. And as we spoke about last week, Jews would always pilgrimage to the great academies, to the great yeshivas in Surah and Naharda and Pumbedisa. You'd go to Babylon and study Torah. And if you had a question, let's say you lived in North Africa and you had a question in Halachah, you would send a courier to Babylonia and get a response back from one of the Gaonim. That's what they were called then. The head of the yeshiva was called the Gaonim, the geniuses. But Maimonides saw times are changing. Jews are not as bright. Jews need more guidance in Jewish law. We're lacking leadership. Maimonides grew up in Spain. He saw the Jewish community needed something better. Something needs to happen here. And Jewish law is inaccessible. And he saw that well-meaning Jews simply did not know the law. They didn't know how to live as Jews. So Maimonides started a massive project. And it was an act of genius, absolute genius. It took tremendous courage, took tremendous confidence, literal strength of mind, which is he went through the Talmud, went through the Mishnah, and he reimagined and he invented what's called a code of Jewish law. An organized series, an organized set that tells you Jewish law straightforward. Organized, intuitive, easy to read. Maimonides wanted to be so simple. He didn't leave any ambiguity. No debates, no maybes. Straightforward, this is the law. And it was beautiful. It is beautiful. It's called Mishnah Torah, which means a review of the Torah. And he said every Jew could read this and every Jew could know the entire Torah by reading my book, Mishnah Torah. He didn't even put in any footnotes, which means when you read it, you don't know where he's getting his opinions from. He says, trust me, it's not an academic work, meaning it is, but it's written as the most simple work. He wrote it in such simple Hebrew. The Talmud is so difficult, so dense, so terse, so difficult to understand. Maimonides is the exact opposite. So in the Talmud, if you want to know the laws comprehensively, of, let's say, the laws of giving charity. What are the laws of giving charity? It's not a very complex area of Jewish law. You would have to start scouring through dozens of different sources all throughout the Talmud. And you still won't have full clarity what exactly are the laws. Maimonides, in an absolute act of genius, organized it. He made it look easy. And he published a book called Mishnah Torah. And this is just this is an example, I pulled this off the internet, of an early manuscript of the Mishnah Torah. I believe it's from the 1300s, maybe early 1400s, from Spain. And I just want to show this to you. This is the beginning of his second book, called The Book of Love, Ahava. What do you think the Book of Love is about? No. I know, it's counterintuitive. It's about it's the relationship of Jews and God. The laws of Jewish ritual life is here. The first series of laws in the book of Ahava, the book of love, is the laws of Kriya Shema, of reciting Shema in the morning. That's the first mission. That's the first mitzvah of a Jew in the morning. Let's say the Shema. All the acts that we do for God is in the book of love, which is pretty beautiful, no? What a name to give to Jewish ritual life. Love. Okay. But look at this. An index, table of contents. He tells you what you could find in this book. He tells you how many chapters are in each section. Everything is divided into sections. First, laws of Shema, then the laws of prayer, then the laws of the Torah scroll. Then we'll go to Shabbos and then to the holidays. Beautiful, organized. Chapter 1, paragraphs. Everything's intuitive. He says it properly. So intuitive. He doesn't tell you anything out of place. Everything flows. He starts from the general points. He gets more specific, more detailed. Everything is broken down beautifully. There's literally no ambiguity. He'll never say, I think the law is this, but maybe sometimes do this. There's such confidence, such clarity. And he says this book is for the greatest scholar and it's for the most simple person as well. For the smallest person. Every Jew can learn. And I don't have a book over here, but what he did was massive. He revolutionized Jewish accessibility to Jewish law. the model of a code that a Jew could open up a book and study halachah. As you could imagine, it raised many eyebrows. Many rabbis were upset. You're cheapening Jewish learning. This is not the way to study. We study the hard way. Break your head on Talmud. Figure out the law. What, are you going to give it on a silver platter? A lot of rabbis did not like what Maimonides did. But Maimonides was very confident in himself. And like a real Jewish leader, he knew what needs to be done. And history has proven him correct. His model worked. His model is accepted. Maimonides made that massive contribution that now Judaism could live in codes. Okay. But Maimonides, there was a lot of controversy against Maimonides because the world didn't fully accept him. Specifically, Maimonides was a Jew from Sephard. He was a Sephardic Jew. Now, I'm sure all of you, most of you have heard of these stereotypes. There's Sephardi Jews, there's Ashkenazi Jews. But historically speaking, it starts pretty much right before Maimonides' times. There were two basic centers of Jewish life. There were the Sephardic countries, which were usually under Muslim rule, which is Spain, of course, Portugal, North Africa, Morocco, North Africa, and the Middle East. That whole swath of land was considered the Sephardi Jews. Then, once you go to, and even Southern Europe, okay. Once you go to Western Europe, Central Europe, Eastern Europe, that becomes the Ashkenazi land. They're under Christian rule. Now, these two areas of Jewish life had different rabbis and developed different flavors, different cultures, which means even within Jewish life, even within being true to tradition, each started being very unique to their style. And we're not going to get into it in today's class. It's a more advanced type of topic. But there's the way that the Sephardim study Talmud. There's the way the Ashkenazim study Talmud. There's the Sephardi approach to halacha. There's the Ashkenazi approach to halacha. Maimonides was a Sephardi. The Ashkenazim didn't accept him. So very few Jews in Ashkenaz were studying Maimonides, but he broke the model. He created the model. And at this point, we are ready. And I can't stress enough just how massive Maimonides' revolution was. The whole idea of taking any part of Torah and codifying it and building upon it and being decisive and officially putting it into a book. That was massive. Okay. And at this point, we are ready to keep on scrolling down our map. Our next stop is a few hundred years later, 150 years later, maybe a little bit more, 200 years later. In the year 1340, there's a Jew. His name is Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher. Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher is an Ashkenazi Jew. And he, somewhat inspired by Maimonides, writes his own code. He does it in a very different style than Maimonides. It has the Ashkenazi flavor. You could say the Ashkenazi coldness. The Sephardim are a little bit more warm. There's a little bit more warmth in Maimonides. He does it as a very legal text. Maimonides doesn't tell you where he gets anything from. You have to purely trust Maimonides. There's not a single citation in the whole book. He'll never tell you, by the way, I know you'll wonder where I got this from. I got it from this little piece of Talmud. He doesn't tell you anything. Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher, he tells you how he gets to his conclusion. But in any case, Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher publishes a book called the Torah. And the Torah is really the nickname of his book. The full name is called Arba'a Turim, which means 4 columns. 4 columns. A Torah means a column. What he did was he organized Jewish life and Jewish law into 4 different categories. So his book, which is actually today, if you want to buy it, it's like 25 volumes. So, it's like basically the size of the Talmud at this point. Huh? But that's also with all the commentaries. But the Talmud also has a lot of commentaries. What he does is he took all of Jewish life and he organized it in 4 different categories. And if you look over here, let's just review them quickly. The first category of the Torah is called Orach Chaim. Orach Chaim means the way of life. The basics of Jewish living is in the section called Orach Chaim. So Orach Chaim begins with wake up. How does a Jew wake up? First second of your day. It goes through the entire Jewish day. Then it talks about Shabbos. Then it goes through all the holidays. Okay, basically, Jewish life around the year, what does it look like? That is the first section. Then he wrote another column, another area of Jewish law, which is called Yorei Deya, which means instructor of knowledge. And over here, he has all the more specialized areas of Jewish law and the areas where you need certain rabbinical expertise. So, for example, the laws of kosher. Laws of kosher, not every rabbi understands how to apply the laws of kosher. They're very nuanced. You have to have a certain expertise. There's a whole training for rabbis who are going into the kosher industry. A regular rabbi doesn't have that training. A regular rabbi can't answer certain questions. How to build a mikveh. If someone would call me up and say, Rabbi Dubov, I like you a lot. You're a very bright guy. I want to build a mikveh. Can you help me build a mikveh? Yeah, I'm a rabbi and I've studied many of the laws of mikveh. I cannot show up to a construction site and help you build a mikveh. It's tremendous expertise. And so on and so forth. Different special areas, circumcision, how to write a Torah scroll, all these niche areas of Jewish law, which are, I'll call them specialty rabbinics. Specialty rabbinics. That's in Yorei Deya. Even HaEzer, the third section, which is called the Stone of Salvation, is all about marriage and divorce. And then the final section, Choshen Mishpat, which means breastplate of judgment, is civil law, financial, civil, and criminal law. That's in Choshen Mishpat, business law. Okay, that's all there. And the Tur publishes his book, which becomes the Ashkenazi version or the Ashkenazi rival of Maimonides. Rival is the wrong word. So basically, you kind of have right now two main codes. You have Maimonides that is very well accepted in the Sephardi lands. They look to Maimonides' books, and that's how they know what Jewish law is. The Ashkenazim look to the Tur, to Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher, and he's the authority. And what happens is, especially the Tur, but also Maimonides, all of a sudden you have commentaries that look at the Tur and start writing all these commentaries. But if you would say, what is the book of Jewish law? It doesn't exist yet. If you would walk into a Jewish bookstore and say, I want the book of Jewish law, and you live in the year 1400, they would say, well, are you a Sephardi or are you Ashkenazi? You know, there's no yet one code. So here we get to the next step of Jewish law, which is one of the most important steps. The next step here happens in the year 1563. 1563, there's a Jew. His name is Rabbi Yosef Cairo. Remember that name? Have you ever heard of the name Rabbi Yosef Cairo? All right, it's actually funny because we really don't know much about him. Besides the book that he published, he's pretty much an anonymous person. You know, or in other words, his book lives on way past him. You know, Maimonides is Maimonides. His book is not bigger than the person. But when it comes to Rabbi Yosef Cairo, the book made the person. Okay, so there's two rabbis. Just look at this, Rabbi Yosef Cairo, and this is too small to read over here. Hopefully visually you could see where we are on your map as well. There's Rabbi Yosef Cairo, and there's another rabbi, Rabbi Moshe Isserlis. These are two rabbis who live in the exact same time, became collaborators. Collaborators. Wow, I am low on sleep over here. Okay, but they've never met each other, and they never will meet each other. Rabbi Yosef Cairo is a Sephardic rabbi. He grew up in Spain, left with the Spanish expulsion in 1498, right? 1492, same year that Columbus discovered America. 1492, and settles in the land of Israel in Safat. He's a Sephardi rabbi. Rabbi Moshe Isserlis is Ashkenazi. He's the rabbi of Krakow, Poland. Two different worlds. They were both great rabbis, and they both wrote commentaries on the Torah. Rabbi Moshe Isserlis wrote a commentary that's printed on every single Torah page called Darchei Moshe. Rabbi Yosef Karo wrote a commentary called the Beit Yosef. They were both very big halachists. They were big in the world of Jewish law. Rabbi Yosef Karo had an idea. He's like, look, he looks at the Torah, and he says the Torah is a little bit too big. It's a little bit too dense, a little bit too much information going on over there. It's not accessible enough to Jews. Plus, it's about like 200 years old. Jewish law needs an updated version of its code. So he says, I want to write a book. Now, I want to write a book which is going to be so succinct, so simple, so accessible, right? A lot of similar themes over here. And he wanted to write a book that every single Jew, it should be short enough that every Jew could read it every month. He wanted to write a book that within every single month, everybody could read it. So he starts authoring a book called the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch means a set table. Right? So when you walk into a restaurant, you want a set table. Nobody wants to walk in there saying, let's put on the tablecloth. We don't have any nice table setting. Let's figure something out for you. You want to come and everything's ready. He says, that's what I want to do to Jewish law. I don't want you to have to be worried. I don't want you to have to wade through the mud. This is it. Straightforward, easy for you to follow. He's writing the Shulchan Aruch. Meant to be a very brief code, accessible, without a single extra thing there. Nothing missing, nothing extra. That's his goal. Rabbi Moshe Isserlis, many hundreds of miles away, has the exact same idea. He starts writing a very similar type of work. The problem is that Rabbi Yosef Karo publishes his first. Rabbi Yosef Karo is a little bit older than Rabbi Moshe Isserlis, and he publishes the Shulchan Aruch first. Moshe Isserlis is sitting in Krakow. He's in the middle of writing his manuscript, and all of a sudden he gets a copy of the Shulchan Aruch, freshly minted book. And he's like, that's it. My whole life's work is just obsolete. Somebody beat me to it. So he did something quite remarkable. Rabbi Moshe Isserlis, he shelves his project. He says, Rabbi Yosef Karo Shulchan Aruch is amazing. I can't rival that. But what he does is, Rabbi Moshe Isserlis says, Rabbi Yosef Karo Shulchan Aruch, this is a Sephardi rabbi, and he's writing the Sephardi tradition. Let me republish the Shulchan Aruch with my little notes that will also include the Ashkenazi tradition. And that's what he does, which is a real act of humility. He doesn't go and say, you know what, I'll make my own book and I hope my book makes, is a better seller. He says, let me honor the work of this great rabbi and I'll enhance it. What he called his work was the mappa. The mappa means a tablecloth. A tablecloth. Rabbi Yosef Karo set the table, I contributed a tablecloth. He publishes Rabbi Yosef Karo's book, the Shulchan Aruch, but now we have one book that is Jewish law for every single Jew. Whether you're Sephardi or whether you're Ashkenazi, this is your tradition. And it was very, very accessible. The Torah is very, very large. It's a big work. It's a lot more in-depth. Shulchan Aruch is very accessible. They follow the exact same model. The laws are structured in the exact same way as the Torah did 200 years earlier. And from then, Jews look at the Shulchan Aruch and say, this is our book. We've got it. This is our code. There was never a meeting that voted on this, but fate had it that the Shulchan Aruch, starting from then till today, defines Jewish law. So there are many other works over here, and there are even many other codes. If you look on your page over here, the Samag, Rabbi Moshe of Kusi, in the year 1300 published a code. But you do not open up the Samag to rule Jewish law. Jewish law is the Shulchan Aruch. From then in the 1500s till today, and nothing's changing, this is the way it is. The Shulchan Aruch is where Jewish law is. If you have a question about any given area of Jewish life today, the book that you open up is the Shulchan Aruch. And let me show it to you. This is the Shulchan Aruch. Okay. You're going to say, this is the Shulchan Aruch. This is a small book. This is only one volume of like 15 volumes. Because the way we Jews love doing it is that once there's a good book, we write a lot of commentaries on it. But you can't get lost by the commentaries. In the center is the Shulchan Aruch. So as you'll see, if you isolate the Shulchan Aruch and you take out all the commentaries, it's actually not that much. You have the large print, that is Rabbi Yosef Cairo, the Sephardi. And if you look carefully, this page barely has it. All of a sudden, in the middle of the text, in a different font, there's a little note. And that is Rabbi Moshe Isserlis. He's telling you the Ashkenazi, whenever there's a difference for the Ashkenazi communities. The page by page, you have this collaboration. I got that right? So page by page, you have a book authored by two men who've never met each other and never officially agreed to be collaborators. But what's more Jewish than that? What's more beautiful than that? And this act of partnership of two different rabbis from two different communities, two different worlds, this is now the authoritative Jewish law. Now, what happened is there are now many, many commentaries. Every single page is dwarfed by all the small lettering. The problem is these are not just commentaries. These are vital insights into understanding how to apply these laws. So you cannot buy, it's not even in existence, a Shulchan Aruch without commentaries. It doesn't exist. You can't study now Jewish law without commentaries. But that means that their dream of making an accessible book just became a scholar's book. Understand what's happening over here? Vicious cycle going on over here. So the next step in our history, getting down to today. So first of all the red is commentary. All these guys are the commentaries in this book, plus more. I'm saying these are all the classics: the Magen Avraham, the Shach of Shapsei HaKohen, the Chelkas Mechokik, the Sema, the Ksais HaKoshen, Beis Shmuel, Yenis Neipchitz, Rabbi Kiva Eger, the Gra, etc., etc. And you cannot study Jewish law from the Shulchan Aruch unless you see all these commentaries and you study them properly. Okay. Comes along the next big step over here, which happens in 1772. The founder of Chabad, Rabbi Shneir Zalman, who authored the Tanya, he also published a new version of the Shulchan Aruch, a book called Shulchan Aruch, with the exact same name. We differentiate it by calling it Shulchan Aruch Harav, the Shulchan Aruch of the Rav. What he did was, he took the original Shulchan Aruch, with all the commentaries and deliberations that break up the law even more precisely. And he takes any developments in the world of Halachah in the few hundred years since the original publishing of the Shulchan Aruch, and he authors a book that reads straightforward, which is an act of brilliance. It's not so simple. If you take any chapter, just a small chapter, studied in the original Shulchan Aruch, read all the commentaries, your head will be dizzy. I'm now confused with the laws. And then you read how he organizes it for you here in this book. Oh, now I have Jewish law. So he really created the more modern model today, which is a book of law that has no commentaries. Everything is laid out perfectly. And that's what gets us still today. So Jewish law, as ancient as it is, it's really a story of development that brings us right till today. This was published in 1772. Once he did this, a few other people copied him later on. Another version of this model is the Mishnah Berurah of Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan. He did that in 1906. So these are the modern day books that give you Jewish law, straightforward, easy reading, and everything is covered. Okay, one last important work of Jewish law I want to share with you is a very simple rabbi who did not think much of himself at the time, but he wrote one of the most important halachic works today, which is on the bottom left of your mat, which is called Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. Kitzur Shulchan Aruch is this book, and it's the only book of Jewish law that has no volume 2. This is it. The word Kitzur means abridged. He's like, look, yes, if somebody wants to understand Jewish law in its all depth and breadth and all the nuanced cases and all the maybes and all the what ifs, there's other books. But this is a book that he published that takes all of Jewish law and just only tells you the important parts. He doesn't want to overwhelm you. If you're a simple Jew, I can't study and all of a sudden master Jewish law. I'm just a simple Jew. I want to know what God wants me to do today. Pesach is coming. What are the laws? Purim is coming. What are the laws? And don't give me 100 pages to read. Give me 3 pages. That's what he does. He takes Shulchan Aruch, he takes the big Shulchan Aruch, and just simply gives you a shortened version of it. And the whole Shulchan Aruch is in this one book. So you can take any topic, and more or less, this book tells you everything. Now, if you start having questions, open up the bigger books. This is not going to tell you everything. This is only the abridged version. But if you want to know how to celebrate Purim, what are the laws of Purim? How do I run a Seder? I just forgot. It's been 12 months since the last Seder. What are all the steps of the Seder? What are the halachic requirements? It's not a lot of reading. 5 pages and you got it all. So this book is in Hebrew, but it exists in English as well. There are many translations, and the Rebbe would always encourage you to study Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. It's easy, it's accessible, you can get it in any language. This is what Judaism wants from you. And it's very intuitive. And this is the Jewish law that we live with till today. So, how does Jewish law begin? Should I read you the first law of Jewish law? This is volume 1. How does Jewish law begin? What was that? Volume 1 of section 1. This is of Orach Chaim. So this is this over here. Orach Chaim of Shulchan Aruch is this book. Okay, you open up. The opening section is called Hilchos Hanhagas Adam B'Boker. How should a person act in the morning? That's a set of laws. Section 1, Din Hashkamas Haboker, the laws of waking up in the morning. Uvay Tesa Ifim, and within this section there are 9 paragraphs. Paragraph number 1, Aleph. Yiskaber Kari, you shall strengthen yourself like a lion. Lamod Baboker, to wake up in the morning. Lavodas Boro, to serve your maker, to serve God. Sheyehei hu me'or hashachar, that you shall be the one to wake up the morning. Don't let the morning wake you up. You wake up the morning. How poetic is that, huh? Wake up like a lion. Take the day like a beast. We're gonna do stuff. It's not. Okay. And then Rabbi Moshe Isserlis right away jumps in and starts adding his own comments in between the words. Okay, he has another, he right away adds in some stuff. One of the things that Rabbi Moshe Isserlis adds in right away is Lo yizbayish mimnei bnei adam hamaligim alav ba'avodas Hashem yizbarach. Don't ever be ashamed of people who laugh at you for serving God. This is the opening of Jewish law. This is not nice ethics. This is law. Not allowed to get embarrassed. Number 1, this is the genesis. This is in the beginning of Jewish law. So, dear friends, that brings us the way Jewish law works till today. But there's one more thing we got to do. One more thing. How are we doing so far? Do we have any questions? Are you following, or am I just totally losing you and confusing you? It's doing good. It makes sense. Okay. A lot of time just went by, huh? There's one more thing. If you look at the right side of your mat, there's a little sidebar over here, a tan sidebar, which is called halachic responsa. And you'll see that halachic responsa is a genre of books within Jewish law that span all of history. Starts with the responsa of the Gaonim about 1,500 years ago, going down till today. Till today, there's responsa published literally in our times. So what is responsa? Responsa is where the magic of Jewish law development happens. These are the laboratories of development. So I gave the example earlier about a self-driving car and the Shabbos elevator. And you're like, how could Jewish law have an opinion on that? So this is not a modern day question. We've always had those questions. When the Jews started leaving Israel and started living in Babylonia, and then North Africa, and then Spain, and then Germany and France, you know how many new questions the Jews had, new circumstances that have never been brought up before? And all of a sudden they wondered, what does God want from us in these opportunities? So there's a certain art, which there's a very advanced art of rabbis that are called a posek, or the that's in the singular form, or we call them poskim. Poskim refers to all of them, right? The job of a posek is to take a new question or new development and give the authoritative, decisive ruling. What does Jewish law say here? How do they do that? They have to go through this entire map. Start from the Bible, study pieces in the Mishnah, study the Talmud, identify what cases in the Talmud apply to this new case at hand. What are the considerations? How would the old principles apply to new cases? This was not simple to do, but these poskim, and every generation has to have poskim, so that we could go to them with our questions. They give rulings, they publish the rulings, and those rulings become part of Jewish law. And in the next version of, the next time a great scholar publishes a code of Jewish law, they'll include the new rulings. It's like that Jewish law is brought up to date. So I want to take 3 minutes. Look in your books on page 150. Turn back a few pages. This is a beautiful, beautiful spread of about 30 samples of questions from responsa that these poskim had to look at and give the answer. What does Jewish law say about this? I want you to take 30 minutes. Sorry, not 30 minutes, 3 minutes. Review. I want to hear what are your favorite halachic questions over here. And what you'll see, it spans cultures, lands, times, circumstances. Every time, every area has different issues that they have to deal with. Yes.
I look at this, and I notice my dad's family comes from a small town in Poland that is right near Lomza.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at this.
Lumja, yeah, okay.
And I look at this and I see 1891, may a couple who are unable to conceive resort to artificial insemination in 1891.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty amazing.
That's pretty early. That was the meaning. This was cutting edge back then. Yeah.
Right, but this was not the center of the world right there.
No.
These were.
So these rabbis had to somehow have their finger on the pulse of what's. It's true. That's a very good point.
Water is something that we don't think of until the 1970s.
Right. It's true. This was probably the very first testing of it, and it was maybe like an option. Maybe like the rogue doctors were doing this type of stuff. But I do think there was a very elementary way of doing it back then, which was totally not sophisticated like we do it today. But in any case,
And they certainly knew of it with animals, so.
right,
The concept.
right. The concept exists. They did it, yeah, right, but not with the type of technological advances that we have today. So how are we doing? What do you like over here? Parag, let me try to find it. Right, they're allowed to do an autopsy to learn about it. Okay, FYI, we're going to be featuring this Prague question in our medical ethics course next year. Full lesson exploring just this one. Now, let me just tell you something. I'm not going to give you any of the answers to any of these questions because every single one of these is a full class and maybe even more. Because these are not yes or no answers. These are, again, it's not a rabbi giving you a gut feeling. I think this, I think that. It's applied authentic Judaism to modern day cases. What else? So, okay, so we got from you, we got from Max. Any other favorites? Any other interesting questions that are specifically piquing your interest? They're all interesting. But this is just an example showing you how new questions is not new. Jews have always had new questions, and Jews always wanted to know, what does God want me to do here? God put me in this world, and there's a way to live as a Jew. What does Hashem want from me? And if it's not easy to get the answer, most questions are not hard to know. Most questions today, you look at a Shulchan Aruch, relatively easy to find the answer. Some questions really are brand new. It's cutting edge. No one knows the answer to this. So you got to go to Posek. To a posek, to one of these rabbis, which are, so in our times, one of the greatest poskim, where is he on this page? He's on the very left side in New York, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein passed away in 1987, if I'm not mistaken. He was a rabbi in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein was the leading halachic authority of contemporary times. Till today, we refer to Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. You want to hear a quick little story about Rabbi Moshe Feinstein? I'm saying he wasn't just accepted in the Jewish world. I'll read a text in a moment with you just to show you. There was a doctor, a psychiatrist out of Pittsburgh. His name was Rabbi Abraham J. Twersky. And he was very involved in the world of addicts. He was a Hasidic Jew, a religious Jew, who was also had a PhD. He was a doctor. He was a leading psychiatrist. And he was once approached by a Christian minister. Christian, Catholic, I don't know, Catholic minister. And he says, I'm an addict. Part of my service is I need to drink wine, right? The wafers and wine. He says, but alcohol is dangerous for me. So what do you tell Jews to do? This is what this minister asked Rabbi Twersky. Rabbi Twersky said, according to Jewish law, if the wine is a dangerous substance, you're allowed to substitute it with grape juice. Oh, so this Catholic minister went back to his church and started using grape juice instead of wine. And there was a little bit of an uproar. What does this mean, using grape juice instead of wine in the church? And it went to the Vatican. And the Vatican challenged him. They wanted to revoke his position. What does that mean that you're not drinking wine? You're doing grape juice? He says, I went to a great rabbi, and he said this is what Jewish law is. He said, and we, the Christians, are based on Jewish law. So if Jewish law says grape juice, then also us grape juice. The Vatican had a representative that called up Rabbi Twersky. And they said, where did you get this from? He said, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein in the 1960s was asked this question. He gave a halachic ruling, published in his book of Responsa, that you're allowed to use grape juice. An addict is allowed to use grape juice instead of wine. The Vatican came back to Rabbi Twersky and said that if Rabbi Moshe Feinstein said that it's okay, then we accept it. True story. This is a true story. Rabbi Twersky said the story himself. I want to read one text with you just to show you the idea, the weight of a rabbi needing to decide Jewish law. It's not simple. It's an art, and it's not cheap. It's not rabbis making up opinions. It is, you need to have, on the one hand, a lot of integrity, a lot of strength of mind. You need to be very smart, but you're applying God's wisdom to new questions. What is the right thing to do? So I want to go all the way to the back of this lesson. I'm going to go a little bit out of order over here. I just want to read a text with you. This is a little text. Go to page 180. 180. I want to read this text with you. It'll give us a little bit of an idea of what does that mean that a rabbi has to deal with a real question, apply law to it. Text 25, page 180. Susan, are we holding by you? Would you like to read?
Sure.
There we go.
2 babies, 1 heart. Early in September 1977, in Lakewood, New Jersey, Siamese twins were born to a prestigious family of Torah educators. The twins were taken by helicopter on September 15th to the Children's Hospital in Philadelphia, where Dr. C. Everett Koop, who subsequently became the Surgeon General of the United States, was then the hospital's chief of surgery. Immediately after the initial evaluation, it was obvious to all the physicians called in to evaluate the twins that both would die unless they were separated. However, the only way one child would be viable was if the other child was killed during surgery. This question was referred to Rabbi Moshe Feinstein for his evaluation and decision. The children, designated baby A and baby B, shared one 6-chambered heart. The wall separating the essentially normal 4 chambers from the other 2, most likely the stunted heart of baby A, was too thin to be divided. It was not possible to give the 2-chambered heart to baby A. The entire 6-chambered heart had to be given to baby B, and the life of baby A would have to be sacrificed. It was clear to all concerned that this was a major ethical issue. Nurses and doctors at Children's Hospital consulted with their religious guides and many reported back that they would not be able to participate in the surgery. When the team of 20 or so professionals were awaiting Rob Feinstein's decision, and indeed were expressing impatience at the lapse of time, Dr. Koop quieted the group with the following statement: "The ethics and morals involved in this decision are too complex for me. I believe they are too complex for you as well. Therefore, I referred it to an old rabbi on the Lower East Side of New York. He is a great scholar, a saintly individual. He knows how to answer such questions. When he tells me, I too will know."
You know what Rabbi Moshe Feinstein was doing in those 2 weeks? All right, this is not academic, theoretical study. This is very real. He studied and clarified all the considerations that halacha would have in this case. He then spoke with physicians. What considerations apply here? I want to understand exactly what's the nature of this issue. His ultimate ruling was they should do the surgery and let baby B live and sacrifice the life of baby A. He did not come to that decision lightly. And he came to the determination that that is not an optional, that is the obligation. That's what Torah wants us to do here. But how could the Torah talk about a six-chambered heart that can join twins? He's applying old principles to new cases. And that's the art of it. There was a rabbi just passed away recently, really one of the greatest scholars of the modern time. His name is Rabbi Adin Evan Israel Steinsaltz. He lived in Israel. And he was actually the first one to take the Talmud and make it accessible. He published a Hebrew and English Talmud. He did it by himself, single-handedly, to create an English Talmud that explains the Talmud in modern Hebrew, make the Talmud accessible. Brilliant man. He gave a weekly class in the Knesset teaching Talmud. And this was in the early years of Israel, the 50s, the 60s. We're talking about the original politicians and statesmen. The founding fathers of Israel would go to his weekly class in the Knesset. And once there was a very secular Knesset member who approached him and said, "Rabbi Steinsaltz, please, this whole learning is foolish. This whole thing is stupid. We're learning about the laws of one ox goring another ox. Well, what is this? Why are we learning all these outdated laws? This is relevant. This is history." So Rabbi Steinsaltz told him, "If you think we're learning about cows, then you're the cow." We're not learning about cows. We're learning about principles. We're understanding how Jewish law thinks. And that's the idea. Jewish law is living and breathing and is being applied today as all of Jewish history. So what I want to do with you for the remainder of today's class, the next 20 minutes, hopefully without going over time, I want to bring Jewish law to life. I'm not going to tell you, I want to keep it a little bit suspenseful. I'm not going to tell you which one of these 30 questions we're going to tackle. We're going to go on a journey. We'll start with the Torah, with the Bible. We'll start getting a little bit of a picture of Jewish law, a specific area of Jewish law. We'll bring in different cases. We'll see how it's discussed in the Mishnah and the Talmud. We'll start building a little case. And then we're going to see how a posek used all these ideas, all these arguments to deal with a very real life issue he was dealing with, and that he was posed a question. So you ready to go on a real halachic journey? Let's do it. It's all about the preservation of human life. Let's bring Jewish life to life. Okay, I also want to mention over here that there is a video, which I don't want to show you in the class. It's a very long video, and it goes through this whole map very in depth. And I'm going to save it for your extracurricular study. So I'll be sending out the link to the video in the email afterwards, and watch it once, maybe even twice. It's a lot going on over there. So I didn't want to show it in the class. Okay. The concept, the preciousness of a human life. I want to talk about that right now. All right, let's make the stakes very high. Let's not talk about what esrog you're allowed to use on Sukkot. Let's raise attention over here. We'll talk about human life. Let's do a few teachings, a few readings. Let's start with text 6. All right. Text 6 is from a midrash, all the way high up on our tree of halacha. Let's read text 6. Debbie, are we by you? Page 161.
Five on one tablet and five on the other tablet. On one tablet, it says, I am the Lord your God. Opposite, and on the other tablet, it says, do not murder. This teaches us that anyone who spills blood, the Torah considers it as the statute of the Almighty.
All right. So this is a midrash. And what the midrash does is it unpacks all the hidden code within the Torah. And it does that using a visual cue. 10 commandments, but 2 tablets. And the midrash teaches that there's a connection. Whenever there's a juxtaposition between the 2 tablets, it's teaching you something. The top of the first tablet, I'm the Lord your God. Top of the second tablet, do not murder. This teaching us that murdering is not just a sin. It touches God. You're messing with God. You diminish human life. You're diminishing God's presence in this world. Life is the most serious matter in Judaism. To protect human life is top. Let's continue. Text 7. Let's read this verse from the Torah. Stuart, text 7, page 161.
Shall keep my statutes and my laws, which a person shall do and live by them. I am God.
Okay. So there's life and then there's Judaism. What gives way for what? Do you keep Judaism even if it means you'll die? Or do you live and break Judaism? What's an example? Let's say on Shabbos, you find yourself in a life and death situation. The only way out is by breaking Shabbos, violating the Shabbos. Do you say, look, I'm a Jew. If I got to die today. Or do you say, I got to live. So we have to break Shabbos today. Which one is it? A very fundamentalist feeling, maybe. What do you mean? Religion is the most important thing. God is the most important. Let me die for my religion. But the Talmud takes this verse that we just read, text 7, and it learns out a very important principle in the way we Jews look at life and religious life. And Stuart, I want you to read text 8 as well, from the Talmud.
Transgression or death. With all the transgressions of the Torah, a person is told, transgress so that you should not be killed. They should transgress rather than be killed. For the Torah states, live by them, not die by them.
Okay, very straightforward. The way it works in Judaism is, if it's a life and death situation, you break Judaism. That is the way it says. That's text 8. The Torah says live by them. Judaism is a religion to live with, not to die with. So if a person is told to transgress a commandment, they should transgress rather than die. So what's the scenario? You're a Jew, it's Shabbos, and an anti-Semite shows up to you and pulls out a gun and says, break Shabbos or I shoot you. Break Shabbos. And not only you're allowed to break Shabbos, law is you must break Shabbos. Preserve your life. This is not only your own life, this also goes about saving other lives. Break your personal religious life to save another human being. And let's read that now in text 9, Max. This is from the Mishnah now, building upon this principle.
The glass building falls on someone, even if it is doubtful whether they are there or they aren't there. And furthermore, it is doubtful whether they are alive or dead. We must clear the rubble heap from them. If the person is found alive, we continue clearing the rubble.
Okay. So if you hear that a building collapsed, is there somebody there? You don't even know. I don't know if somebody's there. Break the Shabbos, travel there, clean up, start clearing the rubble. Maybe you'll find somebody alive. So that's the way it works. We have a principle, and I want to tell you the Hebrew word for this principle. The Hebrew word is pikuach nefesh. Pikuach nefesh means it's life and death situation, right? When it comes to pikuach nefesh, a soul is in danger, that takes all priority. Everything else goes out the window. Now, Shabbos is not a little deal. Shabbos is one of the 10 commandments. Judaism does not take Shabbos lightly. Violating the Shabbos is no simple matter. But for life, you do it. Okay. Now, every principle sounds good in theory. What the Talmud loves doing is testing principles. How far does it go? To what extent? How extreme? What if there's a conflict of principles? Here's the example. Somebody shows up to you, an anti-Semite, and says, you Jew, I'm giving you till tomorrow morning. You must murder your neighbor, your Jewish neighbor tonight, or tomorrow morning I come and murder you. Kill or be killed. What do you do? On the one hand, you could say, how could I kill? It's a prohibition. But 1 second, the same Torah that says don't kill, don't murder, it also says do everything you can to survive. It's like kill or be killed. It's not so simple. I know our gut feeling is maybe, no, you can't go and kill somebody. Or maybe, yes, somebody's got to die. Why should it be me? One Jew is dying in the next 24 hours. Me or my neighbor. Why does it have to be me? Oh, okay. That's another law. That if there's anybody pursuing somebody else to murder them, there's a mitzvah to kill that person. Not you're allowed to, a mitzvah. And not just somebody's coming to murder you. If you're in downtown Detroit and you see one guy running after another guy with a gun, and you happen to have a gun, if you shoot that guy, you just did a mitzvah. You may have to go to court, but you did a mitzvah. No, so if you could kill the guy, then of course do that. But not always it's so simple. Okay, let's read that in the Talmud, text 12. And just by the way, I just want you to note which tractate of Talmud is this case? Tractate Pesachim, which is about Passover. What's this law doing in tractate Passover? That's how it goes. Welcome to the world of the Talmud. You'll never know what you find anywhere. Okay, let's read text 12. Elki, we're by you, page 164, right? Max, you just read, yeah? Okay, so Elki, text 12.
Person came before Rama and said, "You killed my village that you did so and so. If you will do so, I will kill you." Rama said to him, "Let yourself be killed rather than that you should kill. Why do you think that your blood is better than theirs? Perhaps the blood of that person is better."
Judaism protects human life. There's nothing more precious than human life. But 1 second, someone's going to have to die here. Someone is going dead. Is it going to be you or him? So you could say, well, I want to protect myself. Someone's got to die, let it be him. The Talmud says, but who said your life is of any more value than their life? How do you know? It's 50-50. It's a toss-up. Only God knows who's more precious. Only God knows whose life is more valuable. Or in other words, you don't gain anything for God by murdering that guy. You know why God doesn't want you to murder anybody? You know why God wants to protect your life? Not because God's nice to you and says, oh, okay, break Shabbos, you can live. God wants humans here. You're working for God when you save yourself. You're working for God when you save another human being. One Jew is going to die in the next 12 hours. How could you make that judgment call? You're going to say, I should be the one to live and he should be the one to die. So Talmud simply says, just leave it. You can't make this call. Whatever happens, happens. You can't go and act upon that. Or in other words, the same reason that you would be allowed to break the law now is the exact same reason why you shouldn't do that. It's 50-50, it's just leave it. That's the law. Okay, so in this case, the law is that mitzvahs are set aside in order to save a life. That's true. But if it involves the destruction of another life, the pikuach nefesh principle does not apply. In other words, kill or be killed, put your life on the line. Yeah.
Photo.
I actually don't really know.
Looks like diamonds.
It looks like diamonds.
How relevant.
Whoever made this slide, I don't really know what they were putting over here. Yeah, I thought about that too. I'm not really sure. Okay. Good question. So it sounds simple. In general, try to save a life. But if it's your life versus somebody else's life, what do we have so far? What's the principle? Give up your life, right? The other guy takes priority over your life. Okay. But let's thicken the plot. Not so simple. Nothing so simple. Let's go to a different tractate. Tractate, text 14. Tractate Baba Metzia. All right. And let's see a different case. And let's see what the Talmud says over here. Toby, you read text 14.
Two people are traveling and one of them has a jug of water. If they both drink, both will die of thirst. If only one drinks, he will make it a settled place. Then Pettoria expounded, better that both should drink and die than one should witness the death of the other. And then Rabbi Akiva came and taught. Torah states, your brother shall live with you. Your life comes before the life of your fellow.
Okay. Let's go through the scenario again. Two guys, you're both in a life-threatening situation, but you have the way to get out alive. You could share that resource, but then you both die, but at least you're being nice. Right? At least you're not use whatever word you want to use over here in the last moments of your life or the other guy's life. Or you could say, look, I don't have enough to share with you. I need to live. Too bad on you. You'll die. I'll make it out alive. It's a difficult moral decision over here, huh? Here's another example. Two guys left on an airplane that's going down. There's only one parachute. You could jump out and say, you don't have a parachute? Too bad on you. You're going down with the plane. You're going to leave a guy on the plane and he doesn't have a way out. Or you could say, you know what? Let's go in the parachute together. You know what the only problem is? This parachute wasn't built for two people. You're both going to go for a free fall. So at least you'll be nice, but you'll both be dead. What do you do? Tough decision. So it's called the water jug scenario. Ben Pettora, not as famous as Rabbi Akiva, but Ben Pettora comes and says, share the water. Don't be the cause for your friend's death. Just don't do that. Don't be that heartless. Rabbi Akiva comes and says, no, keep the water for yourself. Your life comes first. The Talmud right away rules the laws like Rabbi Akiva. If you have a resource to live and you need that resource, if you could share with it and you'll survive and he'll survive, then of course share. But if it's a limited resource, you know you need it, keep the water. Now let's just compare these past two cases. Kill or be killed, let yourself be killed, the other guy gets to live. Jug in the desert, you get to live, let the other guy die. Does that fit? Just compare these two scenarios. Ooh, where are we? Kill or be killed, the laws give up your life. Save water, give water, protect your life. What's going on over here? There seems to be a lack of consistency. What's the law? What's the principle? Your life first or their life first? What do you say? So obviously, there's some essential difference between these two cases. And that difference makes all the difference. Kill or be killed, don't kill the other guy. Let yourself be killed. Only one guy could live with this resource. Don't share it, even though the other guy is going to die. Keep that resource like that you live. What's the difference here?
One person can do.
In both cases, only one person is going to live. And
They share the water and both die anyway.
so you're saying in the kill or be killed case, it's never a question of both of them dying. It's only a question of one of them dying. In the water jug case, both of them could die. But how does that logically change the case? So why does that change it around to such a degree?
The analogy, direct analogy would be under part 2, give your water to the other guy.
It seems, which means consistency. The law should either be always protect your life, or the law should always be No, you be.
Give it all to the other guy, so at least someone lives, and it's the other guy this time.
Right, so exactly. So the law would be not just share it, but give it all.
Yeah, give-
Literally give, put yourself on the line. So what's the difference? If you're a posek, you need to decipher the difference. Because you need to understand the nuances of when, what should be done. You ready for the difference? In case one, you are doing an action to end that guy's life. You getting killed is the result of doing nothing, keeping status quo. And save water, give water, it's the exact opposite. You giving him water would be the action. You keeping your water would be keeping status quo. Understand? So let me break this down for you. We see over here, I want to give a little introduction, then I'll get back to this. There's a very big difference in the way secular law works and Jewish law works. In secular law, when it comes to life and death questions, you know what the question always is? Who should live, who should die? Who should live, who should die? Even till today, we just mentioned self-driving cars. Elon Musk and his team have to figure out who should die in car crashes. Should the driver die or should the pedestrian die? We could program the cars to veer and go off a cliff, and the pedestrian lives, but we kill the driver. It's always a question of who, or the famous dilemma, the train's going on a path, 5 people ahead of you, but if you change it, you'll only kill one guy. What do you do? So in secular law, the modern way of thinking about these questions is who should live? Whose life is more valuable? That's the question usually. Jewish law says no. Wrong question. A man never has the right to make that judgment call. Who gets to live? Who should die? Who do you think you are? You're playing God? That's God's business. The question of Jewish law is never who gets to live. The question always is, what does God want you to do? We only have a choice of our decisions, not of our results. Who's going to die in 5 minutes? Who's going to die in 5 hours? Only God knows. Things could change. Maybe you'll both survive. Maybe you'll both die. Who knows? Life and death is not in our hands. Of course, we need to look at it practically. We need to look at the reality. But the question of Jewish law, the perspective is never who should live and who should die. It's a wrong question. The question always is, what does God want you to do in this moment? It's always a question of your action. What should you do right now? It's a whole different attitude. God will decide who's ultimately going to live and who's ultimately going to die. We are responsible for our choices, for our moral choices. Based on this, all right, I'm going to put this up over here. The difference in the cases is a true meaning of moral choice. The choice of who lives or not is never our choice to make. It's never our decision to make. The question is, what will I do in this situation? What should I do? And therefore, what Judaism said, let's go back over here. The question in kill or be killed is not who should get to live. It's, am I allowed to go and do this forbidden act of murder? And the answer is no. You'll die, then so be it. You shouldn't do that action. Lives lost or lives gained is God's business. Which life lost is God's business? You have a question of your moral choice. God does not want you murdering, period. You'll lose your life, none of your business. In the case of save water, give water, why do you get to live? We're not saying you get to live. We're simply saying, are you mandated to give an action? Give away your water. The answer is no. You're not mandated. It's your water. You get to live. You don't have to give it away. So it's never a judgment call of whose life is more valuable in this case. And in essence, you could even take this case of giving water, saving water, and flip it, and you'll die. Let's say you both bought that bottle of water together. Look in the Talmud. Look in that Talmud. Look at text 14. The Talmud is very specific. It says 2 people were traveling, and one of them has a jug of water. The jug of water is only owned by one guy. Let's say 2 people own it. Could you get to keep the whole thing yourself? I get to live. No. If you would do that, you would be a murderer. Both die. You see, the question is never who gets to live, who gets to die. The question always is, what is the right choice to make here? You hear? What the result will be will always be different. Let's say the other guy owns a bottle of water and you steal it. I gotta live, I gotta protect myself. If you would do that, you would be a murderer. Outright. How's that not a murder? It's like choking somebody. Just took away their lifeline. So again, Jewish law is never, ever telling you which life gets to live. Jewish law is simply telling you what is the moral choice to make here. Ultimately, who will live and who will die, that's beyond you. You only make the moral choice. Okay, I know I'm going a little bit over time over here. We're going to wrap up. But one case in the Talmud that really brings out to an extreme this value, that we don't care about life and death. Life and death is God's business. We simply make choices. What does God want us to do? What does God want us not to do? What's our moral obligation to God? Let's read this text. This text is so radical. It really makes no sense. Larry, let's read it. Text 16 from the Jerusalem Talmud, page 168.
A group of people are traveling on the road, and they encounter heathens who say to them, "Give us one of you that we may kill him. Otherwise, we shall kill you all. Even if all of them will be killed, they should not hand over a single Jewish soul."
Okay, just compare the 2 scenarios here. You could find the best way to get one guy and give him in, and then only one Jew dies. Or all of you die, including that guy. How does it not make sense to just find one guy? Make a lottery. Somebody should give up, save 9 other Jews. If you're coming from the perspective of let's try to save lives, let's try to choose who should live, who should die, then the law probably would be figure out who to give in. But Jewish law is telling you, you don't get to choose who lives and dies. That's God's business. You're about making moral choices. The moral choice in this, a Jew doesn't give in another Jew. I'll die, that's God's problem. That's the attitude. Okay. How do we get into this whole problem over here? So we have a principle, pikuach nefesh, that on the one hand, you do everything to preserve life, but it gets a little bit sticky when we have these different cases. We have these 2 different scenarios. Let's bring it down to a halacha case. Dear friends, 1941, not too long ago, all right? 1941, and I apologize for keeping you here a little bit over time, but just stick it out with me over here, all right? 1941, the Kovno ghetto in Lithuania. There's a rabbi in the ghetto. His name is Rabbi Ephraim Ushri. He's pretty young. He's the head of the yeshiva. But the rabbi of Kovno passes away in the ghetto in 1941, and young Rabbi Ushri becomes the rabbi of the ghetto. And this is him right after the liberation. So this is a rabbi. He passed away in 2003. He's a man of our world. He's not like Maimonides that, he's a man of our world. All halachic questions come to him. And Jews who don't even know if they're going to survive another day, coming to him with halachic questions, and questions that one only has when living during a Holocaust. And he has the responsibility of leading Jews in these dark times. And the questions he has to deal with are not theoretical questions. They're not fun brain games. They're not scholarly debates. They're life and death questions that he has to answer on the spot. Jews want to know, what does God want from me? It's my last day alive. What does God want from me today? He kept notes of all the questions he received and how he came to the halachic answers. He buried his notes in the ghetto, hoping to survive. He survived. After the war, he went back to the ghetto and found his manuscripts, and he edited them and published them in a 5-volume series called Shilos Atruvas Mima Mak, questions and answers from the depths, from the abyss. It can make you cry. The questions Jews have to deal with, the ethical questions. And everyone's fighting for survival, and yet Jews want to know they're not acting like animals. What does God want me to do? And Rabbi Ashri is their man. This is the question he gets. Let's read this question. 1941, Kovno Ghetto, Jews are fighting for survival. Text 17 from Rabbi Ephraim Ashri's writings, page 169. Marion, we're back at you.
On LL 165701, the Nazi SS commander Gach arrived in Lithuania. It was he who in the end liquidated the Kovno ghetto. The reputation of this evil and bloodthirsty murderer had preceded him, evoking panic among those imprisoned in the ghetto, as immediately upon his arrival, he executed a number of Jews. At that time, there arose the issue of the notorious white cards. The matter was as follows. Yarden, the German commander of the Kovno ghetto, instructed the Jewish council to distribute among the workers in the ghetto 5,000 white cards, which he gave to them. These individuals would be the only ones allowed to remain in the ghetto with their families, while the rest would be liquidated. After time, there were about 30,000 Jews in the ghetto, including 10,000 workers. I was asked, are those who were grabbing white cards for themselves to save themselves acting properly, knowing that they were preventing another Jewish family from being saved?
Imagine the scenario. There's tens of thousands of families. Only 5,000 families are getting white cards. You have the opportunity to break in and get yourself a card. You have the opportunity to bribe somebody and get a white card. Does Jewish law allow you to do it? And Rabbi Ashri has by tomorrow morning to give somebody an answer. What does God want me to do here? What does God allow me to do? God wants me to actively try to save myself. Is this within what Jewish law lets me do? What Rabbi Ashri does is he traces back what we've just done from the beginning. Well, where does the principle of saving your life even come from? When are you allowed to do something that which will cause somebody else to die? If you take a card, another family, which was maybe even supposed to get it, is not going to get it. When the council is going to give out their 5,000 cards, family 4,999 is going to get the last card, and the 5,000th family, which is supposed to get it, they're going to say, we ran out of white cards. And that family is not going to be saved because of you. What would you say? Based on all that we've learned. Now, you could give a gut feeling, but that's not the way Jewish law works. You got to trace it back. You got to work within the framework. What does Halachah tell us today? Now, all right, okay. Rabbi Ashri looks at our cases, kill or be killed, and the water jug example. And what did these tell us? He concludes there are basically two precedents that he could work with. Number one, it is forbidden to take action. That's the key words. Forbidden to take action that results in another's death in order to save yourself. You're not allowed to go murder another Jew, even though that's an act of saving yourself. That's what we learned from the kill or be killed case. You can't do something that will kill somebody else. Okay, principle number two, you are allowed to not do something, even though you're not doing something will result in somebody else's death, but that not doing something saves your life, like not giving that guy your water. So then the question is, what about the white cards? When you take a white card, is that actively killing somebody? Or is that more passive, which may be allowed? What do you say?
It might depend on how they were intending to distribute the white cards. Because people were just thrown up in the air?
No, I was giving out the 5,000, there's 10,000 workers family, there's 30,000 total family.
So they have specific people already
Yeah,
eligible.
there was a list, yeah. And the Jewish council had to come up with that list.
Like stealing.
Is it still, is it actively taking another life? Or is it passive, which maybe would be allowed? It's not passive, you're saying?
It is,
You're saying it is passive. You're saying you're not going and murdering somebody. You're taking a card that will eventually get to somebody and save their life in 12 months. But you are doing something. You're not just leaving it at status quo. It's not so simple.
It's like taking the water from the body. If it wasn't the right card, let's get back to the water. If that other person has a bottle of water and you take the water from him.
Oh,
that-
there you go. If you take water from somebody else, right,
that's the right card.
then you're a murderer. So would that apply here? Oh, we're not taking it from the person. It will get to that person in 6 weeks, but not today. So Rabbi Ashri is stuck in this difficult space. This in between.
why isn't this just the sheriff? Why isn't?
That's a separate question. The Jewish council asked if they're even allowed to give out the cards based on that case.
Rebel and fight?
So that's something else. That's something else. That's a whole different question. By the way, that is a question in the book. It's a very good question. Absolutely good question. Let's keep it to this. Rabbi Ashri goes and looks in the Shulchan Aruch, takes 3 different citations, one from the Shulchan Aruch, one from a commentary, and one from the Jerusalem Talmud, and gives us the law. The law is you're allowed to steal a white card, not from somebody, from the office. If you steal it from somebody who's in his pocket, you're a murderer. If you get it from the office before it goes somebody, you're allowed to do that. Why? Let's read now 3 texts rather quickly. And keep this in mind over here. The reason why he says you're allowed to do it, number one, no one was actively being handed over to the Germans yet. Which means the Nazis hadn't come yet to liquidate the ghetto. Liquidation did not begin. It won't happen for another year. And the white cards are not in anyone's possessions. These 2 factors, he says, tells us that you're allowed to steal a white card to save yourself. Why? Let's read right now 3 texts rather quickly. Susan, are you able to read? I want to read 3 texts. Each text, text 18, page 171. All right, and we'll do these texts. We'll quickly tell us what the text tells us, and then we'll see what Rabbi Ashri tells us. And I apologize again for going over time. We're wrapping up right here. Go ahead, Susan. Text 18.
Person who anticipates damage that will occur to them is permitted to save themselves, even though this will cause the damage to come to another person. As cited in the Nimuke Yosef commentary to Talmud Baba Batra, chapter of Hashutafim.
Okay, there we have it. You're anticipating damage. You could do something now that will protect yourself, but that when the damage comes, when the calamity comes, is now going to shift the calamity over to somebody else. You're allowed to do that. Text 18 tells us one may save oneself from damage even if others will be affected. Text 19, Debbie, page 172. Aha, you're only allowed to do this preemptive act of salvation if the damage has not arrived. Once the calamity arrives, you're not allowed to go do something that will make that calamity fall upon somebody else. Text 20, Stewart, page 173.
The source of these laws is from the cases presented in the Jerusalem Talmud, 5.135. A person who sees that a water channel is about to flood their field, as long as the water has not yet entered the field, is permitted to divert the water, even though this will cause another's field to be flooded. But once the water has entered the person's field, they are not permitted to divert it to another's field. Regarding a quartermaster, as long as the legions have not yet arrived, a person is permitted to bribe the quartermaster and dislodge soldiers in their home, even though this will result in the soldiers being lodged in someone else's home. But once the legion is gonna arrive, it's forbidden to do so.
Oh, you hear this? That's number 3. Preventative measures are okay, reactive actions are not. In other words, you're allowed to do an action that will save yourself, but will hurt somebody else only if it is before the calamity arrived. Once the danger arrives, you're not allowed to do something that actively shifts that danger onto somebody else. So Rabbi Ushri takes this and says, liquidation has not yet begun. There are white cards that will go to somebody else, but was not yet given over to them yet. You're allowed to take those cards. He gave an answer to a Jew who had an opportunity to save himself, and it's the same principle. We don't know who's going to live, who's going to die. We know what Jewish law tells us to do. One last little story. There's a rabbi in Auschwitz. He survived the war. His name was Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Meisels, a Hasidic rabbi. And one day, something happened in the camp, and the Nazis, as retribution, said that 100 young Bachrim, young yeshiva boys, young men, teenage boys are going to be killed tomorrow. So they gathered 100 boys, they locked them in a barrack, and they announced tomorrow they're going to the gas chambers. One of the fathers of the boys who were taken went to Rabbi Meisels and says, I have a relationship with one of the Nazi guards. I could bribe him and I could free my son. But I know that he's going to have to find another boy to put in his place. Am I allowed to go save my son, even though another boy now is going to get killed? So Rabbi Meisel said, how can I answer such a question? I can't rule. This Jew says, what do you mean? I'm a Jew who follows halacha. I need to know what God lets me do over here. I have a chance to save my son. Am I allowed to do this? Rabbi Meisel says, I'm sorry, I can't answer this question. This Jew told Rabbi Meisels, if there's a way halachically for me to do this, I know you would have told me that it's okay. And the fact that he refused to answer me tells me there's no halachic way out. So I accept the situation. And he had a way to save his son, and he didn't. Rabbi Meisels writes this. Rabbi Ushri writes the exact same thing. The power of a Jew in moments where most people act like animals. And they're asking questions. What does God want me to do here? What's my obligation? It defines the Jewish way of life. So there we have it. We have an halachic question of 1941. We see how there's a question, a very, very emotionally charged question. But how do we know what the law is? It goes through the process of halacha. Dear friends, that is halacha. And next week, we're moving on. Musar, Jewish ethics and Jewish philosophy. We went way over time. Okay, this is 2 classes in a row. We gotta fix something over here. But in any case, have a wonderful evening, dear friends. Thank you for joining. Have a happy Purim. And next Wednesday will be the day after Purim. So hopefully we'll all be in joyous moods. And maybe a little hangover. That's okay. All right. We'll see you all next week.
Thank you.
Sei gesund. All right. I told you guys to get coffee.